Buried beneath the ashes of a dying empire, a weapon too advanced and too horrifying was nearly born. Secrets hidden in equations, whispers encoded in flight paths, and a prisoner scientist caught between brilliance and genocide. The world was moments from a new kind of terror, one that didn't explode, it silently poisoned. Open the files of Operation Nachtgeist, and you may wish they'd stayed sealed. The sea, vast and eternal, has a way of keeping secrets. But sometimes, the tide recedes just enough to reveal the truth. In 1984, a group of Argentine divers exploring wrecks off the coast of Mar del Plata stumbled upon the corroded remains of a sunken submarine. Initial markings were illegible, but a faded iron plate inside the vessel identified it as U-977, one of the last German U-boats to surrender after World War II. For decades, historians believed U-977 had made a routine post-war escape to Argentina. But when divers opened a sealed compartment near the crew quarters, they unearthed something no one expected: a steel case filled with journals and letters penned by the U-boat's second-in-command, Captain Lieutenant Erich Neumann. The journals tell a different story. Neumann, born in Kiel in 1915, was an engineer by training, not a warrior. He was recruited into the Kriegsmarine for his technical prowess, eventually assigned to the U-boat Corps in 1942. By 1945, he served under Captain Heinz Schaefer on U-977. According to official German naval logs, U-977 slipped out of Bergen, Norway, in May 1945, just days after Germany's surrender. Schaefer claimed they were heading to Argentina simply to avoid surrendering to the Allies in Europe. But Neumann's writings suggest otherwise. The entries begin calmly, describing the routine preparations of departure. But by day 4, his tone shifts. Schaefer had issued sealed orders from Admiral Donitz himself. U-977 was not merely escaping, it was on a mission to deliver stolen Enigma components and SS microfilm to Argentine contacts aligned with Odessa, the secret post-war Nazi escape network. Neumann was unaware of the mission's purpose until they were already submerged in the Atlantic. By the time he learned the truth, it was too late. Tension among the crew grew. Several younger sailors, barely out of training, were told they were heading for Norway's northern fjords for a routine patrol. They began to suspect the truth as the boat continued south, diving deeper into uncharted waters. In a chilling passage dated June 3, Neumann writes, "I see fear in their eyes. They know we are not going home." Schaefer offers nothing but silence and orders. The sea is our prison now. Mechanical failures began to plague the vessel. Saltwater infiltrated the air scrubbers, causing bouts of dizziness and hallucinations among the crew. One torpedo engineer, suffering from what Neumann calls deep ocean madness, attempted to open the forward hatch mid-submersion, nearly drowning the bow section. Morale was crumbling, and worse, Neumann's conscience was awakening. A particularly poignant entry dated June 22 reveals a turning point. "I dreamt of my sister's voice, whispering through the metal hull. She said, 'The Reich is dead. Let the ghosts die with it. I cannot follow this course any longer.'" Neumann began covertly documenting coordinates and cataloging the contents of Schaefer's steel briefcase, believing he might someday pass them to the Allies, should they survive the voyage. As U-977 neared the equator, the conditions deteriorated further. Schaefer, increasingly paranoid, accused 2 sailors of sabotage and confined them to the torpedo room without food or water. Neumann intervened, citing naval code, but Schaefer dismissed him, shouting, "We are beyond Reich law. Only the mission matters now." On July 10, the U-boat surfaced briefly to dispose of a body. It was Oberbootsman Felix Wiegand, one of the accused saboteurs. Official records would later state he succumbed to illness. Neumann's journal contradicts this. He was beaten to death with a wrench. The descent into lawlessness continued. Another crewman attempted to seize control of the radio compartment to send a distress signal but was overpowered. In his final log entry before landfall, Neumann wrote, "We are fragments of a dying world, drifting in steel and shame. I no longer serve a nation. I serve truth." On August 17, U-977 arrived off the Argentine coast. Schaefer ordered the destruction of all sensitive documents and demanded the remaining Enigma parts be buried inland after disembarkation. But Newman, anticipating this, hid his own record within a reinforced compartment behind the officer's latrine. He then vanished. Official reports stated he died of dysentery days after surrendering. No body was ever recovered. The discovery of the journals in 1984 sparked a quiet inquiry by Argentine naval historians, but the truth was largely buried under layers of Cold War politics and denials. The Enigma parts were never found. The Argentine contacts mentioned in the journal, coded as Obsidian 1 and OGW, were never identified. Schaefer lived until 1979 and never changed his story. And yet, Eric Newman's voice remains. His writings challenge the sanitized version of the U-977 mission and open a dark window into the chaos and desperation of Nazi Germany's final days. Historians now debate whether Newman was a reluctant conspirator or a silent hero. The Argentine government never acknowledged the journal's authenticity, but fragments were leaked in a 1990 Naval Archive release. Lines from the final page read, "We dove beneath the Atlantic to bury the past, but the sea does not forget. Somewhere out there, the wreck rusts and groans, its secrets sealed in brine and steel. But I wrote this for those who would dare to remember. Echoes from below, now heard above." In the spring of 1943, as German occupation tightened its grip across Europe, a silent war unfolded in the shadowed alleys and bombed-out cafés of Paris. Amid whispers of resistance and the crackle of encrypted radio transmissions, one name began circulating among both Allied operatives and the increasingly desperate Gestapo: Violet Ember. She was a ghost in the Nazi files, a myth among the resistance, and a nightmare for those tasked with rooting her out. But Violet Ember was not a phantom. She was Lucille Hargrave, a linguist, musician, and spy. Born in Marseilles to a French mother and British father, Lucille was fluent in 5 languages by age 16. Her academic career in Oxford was interrupted by the outbreak of war, but her talents did not go unnoticed. In 1940, she was approached by the Special Operations Executive, SOE, Churchill's secret army, and recruited as one of their first female agents. Her training was brutal and swift: hand-to-hand combat, encryption, demolition, and the art of invisible persuasion. In early 1943, she was parachuted into southern France under cover of night. Lucille adopted the identity of Marie Devereux, a traveling piano teacher. With forged documents and a quiet smile, she moved from town to town, never staying more than 3 days. Her piano case concealed a modified radio transmitter. Her sheet music was laced with codes. In every town she visited, she delivered more than sonatas. She carried messages, weapons, and hope. Her most critical work came in the lead-up to Operation Overlord. British intelligence needed precise information about German troop movements, rail schedules, and coastal defenses. Lucille embedded herself in Paris under the guise of a music instructor for the daughter of a Wehrmacht colonel. Through charm and cunning, she gained access to restricted areas of the city. Her nightly reports, broadcast under the code name Violet Ember, helped the Allies map German bunkers near Normandy. But the Gestapo was not idle. Major Wilhelm Strauss, a relentless counterintelligence officer, had grown obsessed with finding Violet Ember. He suspected the Parisian resistance had been compromised from within and launched a brutal campaign of raids and interrogations. One by one, Lucille's contacts disappeared. Her radio operator was shot in a sewer tunnel. Her safe housekeeper was found hanged in his bakery. And still, she continued. On June 1, 1944, Lucille coordinated one of her most daring missions, halting a military convoy bound for Cannes. Using information passed through coded sheet music, local partisans ambushed the convoy near Chartres, delaying critical panzer reinforcements by 48 hours. This action, minor on the scale of the war, had profound consequences. It meant fewer tanks on the beaches of Normandy when the Allies landed 5 days later. The price was steep. Lucille's safe house in Montmartre was discovered on June 4. As Gestapo agents closed in, she set fire to her remaining documents and fled into the catacombs beneath the city. For 3 weeks, she lived like a wraith, moving between tunnels, rationing stale bread and water, guided only by old resistance maps drawn in pencil on linen. The Gestapo believed her dead. But Violet Ember was not finished. In late June, she resurfaced in Rouen, disguised as a Red Cross nurse. She spent the summer relaying battlefield intelligence to British units as they advanced through France. Her final transmission, dated August 16, 1944, simply read, "Fire fades. Ashes bloom. All is ready." That night, she disappeared for good. Her file was closed in 1946. The official SOE report lists her as presumed Kia. But stories persisted. In a Paris tavern, old resistance fighters claimed she slipped away with an American lieutenant and moved to Casablanca. In another version, she joined the Free French in Indochina. Some say she died in the catacombs, buried in a forgotten tunnel among bones and echoes. No one truly knows. In 1998, an elderly woman named Madeleine Declaire donated a tattered music case to a museum in Reims. Inside were 5 pages of piano compositions, written in a cipher lost for over 50 years. When decoded, they detailed German train schedules from June 1944, confirming actions once attributed to sheer Allied luck. To this day, Lucille Hargrave's identity remains unconfirmed. No photographs survive. No grave bears her name. But in the archives of Bletchley Park, in the margins of declassified transcripts, and in the fading memory of those who fought in shadows, her name still flickers like the ember she was. Violet Ember burned quietly, but the light she cast changed the course of a continent. Takashi Mori was just 14 years old when the world ended. Yokohama, 1945. Once a vibrant port city of merchants and laughter, now choked by smoke and scorched by steel. Allied bombing raids had intensified in the final months of the war, but nothing prepared the people for what descended on the night of May 29th. That was the night Yokohama burned, and Takashi became something else. No longer a boy, not yet a man, but a silent witness to the collapse of an empire. The story begins on the wooden floor of a cramped tenement house in Naka Ward. Takashi lived there with his mother, younger sister Emiko, and grandfather, a retired silk trader who muttered old poems and smoked hand-rolled tobacco. His father had died in the Philippines, or so the telegram said. Takashi didn't remember the day the war began, but he remembered clearly when the sugar vanished from their rice balls. He remembered when Emiko stopped asking why they couldn't go to the ocean anymore. And he remembered the sound of sirens, low, mournful, and ever more frequent. On the morning of May 29th, a neighbor whispered that a great bombing was coming. It was just a rumor. There had been many. That night, the family shared boiled barley and pickled radish, lit a single candle, and waited in silence. The sirens came at 11 p.m. Takashi's mother shoved wet cloths into a satchel, grabbed Emiko by the hand, and ordered Takashi to carry their grandfather on his back. Outside, the sky flickered with the first wave of flares dropped by B-29 superfortresses. The city's wooden structures, stacked tight and brittle, glowed like kindling waiting for a spark. That spark came minutes later, when the incendiary bombs fell. Takashi remembered the heat first, not from the flames, but from the air itself, sucked dry of oxygen and filled with screaming wind. The family ran toward Uka River, a common escape route. But every alley seemed to lead deeper into hell. People stumbled past them, hair on fire, carrying bundles of rice and broken radios. A woman screamed her child's name over and over, until her voice vanished into smoke. By the time they reached the riverbank, Emiko had gone missing. Takashi remembered how his mother screamed her daughter's name into the ash-choked air. How she refused to move. How she clawed back toward the fire. Takashi dropped their grandfather near the reeds and ran after her. But the crowd surged, pushing bodies forward, not back. He fell. When he stood up again, the street was empty. He never saw his mother again. Takashi awoke hours later in a schoolyard-turned-refugee camp. The bombing had stopped. The city had been flattened. The sky, once red, had turned gray with soot. Bodies were stacked like timber beside the river. Fires still burned beneath collapsed bridges. And somewhere out there, under a layer of ash, Emiko might still have been calling for him. For weeks, Takashi wondered what was left of Yokohama. Relief was slow. Water came in buckets, rice in sacks guarded by men with rifles. Rumors swirled. American tanks were coming. The Emperor had a secret weapon. The war would end soon. Children bartered buttons and boiled weeds. Old men wept without sound. Takashi survived by collecting scrap metal and working shifts clearing rubble from train tracks. In early August, a soldier with a bandaged arm approached him and said, "You should leave. Soon, it will be worse than this." 2 days later, Hiroshima vanished. 3 days after that, Nagasaki followed. Takashi did not know what kind of weapon could do such things. All he knew was that the Emperor's voice came on the radio a week later. Soft, hesitant, defeated. Japan had surrendered. In the weeks after VJ Day, American troops arrived in trucks and jeeps. They handed out chocolate, notebooks, and chewing gum to the children. Takashi watched from rooftops as young men in strange uniforms walked through the ashes of his home. One GI handed him a comic book. He couldn't read the words, but the pictures showed a hero lifting a car above his head. For some reason, that image stayed with him for the rest of his life. A year later, Takashi was placed in an orphan resettlement program. He was sent to Nagano Prefecture to live with distant relatives who barely knew his name. He stopped talking for nearly 6 months. His hands shook when the wind howled. He had nightmares of red skies and burning people. But time moved forward. By 1951, he was enrolled in a teacher training school. He taught history. Not just dates and emperors, but stories. The stories of those who had no monuments, no medals, only memory. He never found Emiko's body. He never knew if his mother survived a few hours longer. But every May 29th, he returned to Yokohama and lit a single candle beside the riverbank. Not in grief, but in promise. Decades later, an American filmmaker interviewed Takashi for a documentary on civilian survivors of World War II. When asked what he remembered most, he said, "It wasn't the fire. It was the silence after. You can prepare for flames, but you can't prepare for the sound of nothing after everything is gone." In his final years, Takashi published a small memoir, quietly titled Ashes and Rain. On its final page was a photograph, scorched at the edges. It showed 2 children, standing beside a stone wall, smiling with rice balls in hand. Takashi had written beneath it, "We were happy once. That is what I remember." By the summer of 1944, the hills of Provence were heavy with smoke and defiance. The Allies had stormed Normandy, but France remained a battlefield of nerves and blood. In a forgotten corner of southern France, tucked between olive groves and jagged ridges, the village of Vire-sur-Loup prepared for a battle that history would almost forget, but that its people would never stop remembering. The German 11th Panzer Division was retreating north through Provence, bruised by Allied air raids and harassed by resistance fighters. Their orders were to reinforce Lyon and prevent further Allied advancement inland. The route they chose ran straight past Vire-sur-Loup, a village of 600 souls, some sheep, and a defiant heart. The resistance cell there was led by a man few expected to fight. Captain Arturo Delgado was not French. He was a Spanish Republican exile who had fled Franco's regime in 1939. He had fought in the hills of Catalonia, escaped a fascist prison camp, and made his way to France with a limp and a vendetta. In Vire-sur-Loup, he found refuge, and when the Nazis came, he found purpose. Delgado's cell was a ragtag band. Marcel, the teenage courier with a broken bicycle, Sister Agnes, the schoolteacher who could shoot a rifle better than most men, Ivan, a mute Soviet escapee who communicated only in nods, and Claudette, a widow with a Sten gun and a vendetta. They had 5 rifles, 3 working radios, and a crate of British explosives airdropped the previous week. They also had 2 days' warning. On August 14th, a resistance scout intercepted a German motorcycle courier with a map and orders. The panzer column was expected to pass through Vire-sur-Loup on the 16th. Delgado gathered his people under the church bell tower. "We cannot defeat tanks," he said, "but we can delay them. That is enough." The plan was madness. But the Allies were moving toward Grenoble, and even a short delay could shift the balance in the Rhone Valley. Delgado divided the villagers. The elderly and children were escorted into the hills. A few able-bodied farmers remained behind, disguised as townsfolk ready to greet the Germans. The rest prepared the ambush. On the morning of the 16th, the first armored scout vehicles entered the village. They found a quiet square, shuttered homes, and a woman sweeping the steps of the bakery. She smiled and offered them water. When they radioed back to their convoy that the town appeared clear, the trap was sprung. Explosives rigged beneath the stone bridge detonated as the lead panzer crossed. Fire swallowed the vehicle, and chaos erupted. From the rooftops and olive groves, resistance fighters opened fire. Marcel raced through back alleys delivering ammo. Sister Agnes picked off machine gunners with surgical precision. Ivan, the silent Soviet, crawled beneath a half-track and placed a grenade under its chassis, emerging with singed eyebrows and no expression. But the Germans adapted quickly. Mortar fire rained down. Delgado's fighters were driven back toward the town center. Claudette held her position near the church tower, providing cover fire until she was hit in the leg and dragged away by a local butcher turned field medic. The villagers who had stayed behind to act as civilians now took up hidden weapons and joined the fray. By nightfall, the resistance had managed to destroy 3 vehicles and stall the advance for nearly 12 hours. It wasn't enough. The Germans, infuriated and bloodied, began burning houses and executing suspected partisans. Delgado, bleeding from a chest wound, ordered a retreat into the hills. The fighters slipped into the darkness, leaving behind smoldering ruins and buried explosives rigged to detonate if the tanks rolled forward. At dawn on the 17th, the panzers advanced again, but a final trap, a rockslide triggered by Marcel's last act of sabotage, collapsed the main road out of Vire-sur-Loup. The division was forced to reroute east, adding 36 hours to their journey. By then, Allied forces had secured key positions north of Grenoble, cutting off their intended destination. Vire-sur-Loup had bought time, with lives. When the Allies arrived a week later, they found the village half in ruin. 22 civilians had died. Half of the resistance fighters were missing or wounded. Captain Delgado was among the dead, buried in a vineyard with a handwritten note in his pocket, * no soy martyr. Solo estoy cansado de huir. * I am no martyr. I am just tired of running. After the war, the French government awarded Vire-sur-Loup the Croix de Guerre. A small monument was erected in the town square, listing the names of those who fell. The inscription reads, *ils ont parit un armée. Ils ont arrêté le temps. They did not stop an army. They stopped time. Today, few outside province remember the name. No major textbook recounts the battle. But every year, on August 16th, the children of the village gather beneath the church bell and read the names aloud. They tell the story of Sister Agnes, who lived to 90 and never missed a shot. Of Marcel, who joined the post-war police and still limps from a shrapnel wound. Of Ivan, who vanished one night into the hills and was never seen again. And of Arturo Delgado, the Spanish captain who died standing, defending a village that wasn't even his own. History is written by the victors, they say. But sometimes, it is remembered by the grateful. In the waning months of World War II, as Allied bombers turned German cities into ruins and the Red Army closed in from the east, the Nazi regime made a final, desperate gamble, one rooted not in tanks or soldiers, but in the stars. At the heart of this gamble was the V-2 rocket, the world's first ballistic missile, capable of delivering death at supersonic speeds. But hidden beneath the well-known history of Peenemund and Wernher von Braun was a secret even darker and deadlier, a project known only to a handful of men as Nachtgeist. Dr. Elias Roth was a theoretical physicist of Jewish descent who had been imprisoned at Dachau in 1939. Unlike most who wore the yellow star, Roth had one advantage: he was brilliant. Before the war, he had written treatises on propulsion systems that drew the attention of Nazi scientists. In 1943, under the threat of execution, he was secretly transferred to the V-2 development team at Mittelwerk. His survival was conditional. produce results or die. Officially, Roth didn't exist. His name was scrubbed from records, and he lived in an underground lab carved into the Harz Mountains. His guards called him the Ghost, and his colleagues avoided eye contact. But Roth noticed something curious: strange shipments arriving at night, marked with the black sun insignia of the SS. Canisters, charts, files redacted even from senior engineers. Whatever they were building, it wasn't just a rocket. Nachtgeist was born from a fever dream of Heinrich Himmler's, a hybrid V-2 carrying a chemical payload derived from captured Allied research. The idea was monstrous: a silent missile that would disperse aerosolized nerve gas over population centers without warning. London, Antwerp, perhaps even Paris again. The war was nearly lost, but this weapon, Himmler believed, could twist the knife on the way down. Roth saw it differently. He had survived years in the machinery of hate, but this crossed into the realm of genocide reborn. Secretly, he began documenting the details: fuel schematics, payload dispersal models, SS handler names. He knew he had to get this information out, but escape was impossible. So he turned to sabotage. In late 1944, Roth began leaking fragments of intel through encrypted math equations baked into V-2 trajectory logs. The equations were picked up by Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park, who noticed anomalies: inconsistent launch curves, impossible velocity numbers. A young British cryptanalyst named Madeleine Wexley recognized the pattern. The errors weren't mistakes, they were coordinates. The OSS launched a small team to investigate. Codenamed Grey Umbra, the unit parachuted into northern Germany posing as Wehrmacht deserters. Among them was Major Jack Brenner, a former MIT physicist turned intelligence officer. The team's goal: infiltrate the Mittelwerk complex, extract Roth, and confirm whether the Third Reich was preparing to unleash chemical warfare via its rocket program. Inside Mittelwerk, Roth continued his quiet rebellion. He redirected fuel lines, fed false data to SS scientists, and forged documentation to delay launches. But the Nazis grew suspicious. His overseer, Obersturmbannführer Klaus Remmer, ordered Roth's lab sealed and subjected to a security review. Roth knew his time was running out. Grey Umbra made contact with a slave laborer inside the complex, an Italian anti-fascist named Pietro Moretti, who passed messages to Roth using smuggled charcoal and scraps of wire. The extraction was planned for February 23, 1945. It failed. SS guards discovered the OSS team during the infiltration. A firefight erupted in the tunnels. 2 agents were killed. Brenner was shot in the leg but escaped with Roth into a nearby mine shaft. They crawled for hours, pursued by dogs and floodlights. Roth carried with him only a notebook, bound with copper wire and scrawled in microscopic handwriting. They emerged 2 days later in a forest near Nordhausen. Brenner radioed for emergency extraction. A British bomber flew low over the area and dropped a wire basket with supplies and a radio set. Roth and Brenner were airlifted from a makeshift field at dawn. 2 weeks later, a massive Allied air raid destroyed much of Mittelwerk. Whether Nachtgeist had been days or weeks from completion remains unknown. What is known is that, upon debriefing, Roth revealed the full extent of the project: design blueprints, chemical formulas, personnel rosters. His data helped confirm to Allied High Command that Nazi Germany had not just pursued advanced rocket tech, but had come perilously close to weaponizing mass chemical attacks via automated delivery systems. Wernher von Braun and other German scientists were quietly captured in the following months and absorbed into Operation Paperclip, their pasts polished clean in exchange for rocket designs. Roth, meanwhile, was offered asylum in the United States. He declined. He returned to a bombed-out house in Prague, where he lived in obscurity until his death in 1970, never publishing, never speaking publicly. His notebook, labeled only with the initials ER, surfaced decades later in a CIA archive marked top secret. The final page read, **: Science is no nation's property. But it should never belong to monsters. **. Today, Nachtgeist is a ghost, an unrealized nightmare swept beneath the rubble of a dying Reich. But in the silent hallways of intelligence archives and the worn concrete ruins of Mittelwerk, its shadow still lingers. And the iron sky that once threatened to rain terror now serves only as a quiet warning. Brilliance without morality is just another weapon. The rockets never flew, but the horror was real. In the quiet spaces between ambition and atrocity, men played God with shadows. One voice tried to stop them, unheard until it was almost too late. What else was buried with Nachtgeist? And more importantly, who kept digging?